sorrows. You said you'd be there for all my tomorrows. I came so close to sending you away, but just like you promised, you came here to stay. I just had to pray, and Jesus said, come to the water, stand by my side. I know you are thirsty, you won't be denied. I felt every teardrop when in darkness you cried, and I strove to remind you that for those tears I died. Jesus, I give you my heart and my soul. I know now without God I'd never be whole. Savior, you've opened all the right doors, and I thank you and praise you from earth's humble shores. Take me, I'm yours. And Jesus said, come to the water, stand by my side. I know you are thirsty, you won't be denied. I felt every teardrop when in darkness you cried, and I strove to remind you that for those tears I died.
I had two friends, very close friends, go to meet their Maker within this past year. I doubt if I had in my life very many friends, even nearly as close as they were. Now, one was the Vice President of Research for United Technologies, a graduate of MIT in Cambridge, Mass., had his master's degree there, from there. And the other one was Gordon Olson, who was a graduate of Armory Institute in Illinois Technology. Both of them very, very outstanding Christians. Wesley Kurt was president of Sikorsky Aircraft, you know, that makes that portable egg beater that you see it going around the air like this. When they got in trouble, they'd send him down there, get him straightened out, and in 4 or 5 years, they'd need him again. But also, when they bought new companies, like when they bought Otis Elevator, and they bought the Carrier Corporation, and they're quite a large conglomerate, you know. He's a top technical man in the whole company, and he would evaluate the technology of these companies. This other man, which I mentioned, started to do biblical research in 1934, did over 30 years of it, and during that time, working as an engineer 40 hours a week and doing 30 hours of biblical research every week. Not to get a master's degree or a DD or a PhD, fiddle DD or anything like that. He was doing it to get back to what the church preached 100 years ago and 200 years ago that produced this great country. Now, both of those men, if they were alive, and were here tonight, they would agree with me that I am going to speak to you, or start to speak to you, on the most important subject that can ever grace the mind of man. And that subject is the atonement of our Lord Jesus Christ, the atonement. Now, the atonement comes from that word back there in the Hebrew, kopher, which means to cover, and it really was what they called the canopy over the mercy seat in the Old Testament in the tabernacle. Now, the word is only used one time in the New Testament, which has to do with the forgiveness of sin. There's only one thing I ever found I ever agreed with Sigmund Freud on, and that was this. Freud said man's greatest problem is guilt. And I agree with him on that 100%. I don't know anything else I agree with him on, but I do agree with that. Now, our psychologists, our psychiatrists, if you take one of your loved ones to them that's having a few aberrations in his life, that's things that are out of the ordinary, like they brought a young lady to me about 18 years of age from Grand Rapids. The reason they brought her to me, she wouldn't go anywhere on an airplane or train or go anywhere unless she carried a stuffed toy about that big in diameter, about that long. Maybe one day is an elephant, next day is a dog, but you had to have that. Now, my friends, that's what you call an aberration. That departs from the norm, doesn't it? And Mr. Freud would say her biggest problem was guilt. Now, if that young lady's mother had said to me, or said to William Glasser, I'm bringing her to you because my daughter is mentally ill, he'd say, no, she's not mentally ill. Your daughter is crazy. Now, there's a big difference. Now, I'd like to ask you a question. Why would you call a person a horse thief? Very simple, isn't it? Because he steals horses. Why would you call him a dope addict? Because he takes dope. Well, Mr. Glasser says, why would you call a man crazy? And you'd call him crazy because he's doing crazy things, but that doesn't mean he's sick. Because, you know, the very definition of sickness is that there's some malfunctioning or dysfunction of something in your body. And by the way, you may have smallpox, and I can come to the hospital and lecture to you for 1 hour a day for 3 months or 3 weeks or however long your day, but all my talking won't take the smallpox away, will it? Well, if these mental problems are a sickness, why talk about them at $95 and $100 an hour? What is that going to change? Now, in my book, The 4 Trojan Horses, I quote a man who was number 3 man in HEW in Washington, Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. He said that over 95% of the people in mental institutions were not sick. He said they have problems in living. And I would agree with that 100%. Now, Mr. Wesley Kurt, Mr. Gordon Olson, both of whom I have referred to, would agree with me that this subject we're going to talk about and study and have some real reflections upon these next 4 or 5 days would tell you that the only real way, the only positive way that a man can get his guilt resolved is at the cross of Jesus Christ. By the way, the scriptures would teach that too. But I'll tell you, you've got to know the scriptures, and you've got to know them aright before you can ever lead them to that, to be able to do that. Now, we live in a day of experts. We got family seminars. We got motivational speakers, and by that I mean people who speak on motivational gifts, whatever they are. I never figured that out. When I've asked them, they couldn't tell me. And here's a seminar on inner healing. Here's a seminar on the cults. And here's a seminar on New Age. But my dear friends, if you really learn this subject we're going to be looking at this week, you won't need to go to any of those. You'll be able to teach them. Now, it's like this. I have a friend that was a clothing merchant in Muscatine, Iowa, but he was on the board of a local bank. They hired a young man to work in the bank as a teller. After he'd been there a short time, they sent him to Chicago. I believe it was a Federal Reserve Bank. And they're teaching him there how to discern a piece of counterfeit money when it comes through the window. Spent one whole week on that. You know something? During that whole time, they never showed him one piece of counterfeit money. But as he said, when they got done with us, we students, we knew so much about the real thing that when you'd throw down a counterfeit bill in front of us, he said it would be just like taking a white tablecloth without a spot on it and taking an overripe tomato and taking it and throwing it right down. You know why? Because they knew what the real thing really was. Now, the heart of Christianity is the atonement of our Lord Jesus Christ. You're going to be no stronger Christian than what your knowledge of this one is. And I would say, my friends, over 90% of the error in Christianity today, and by the way, if you listen to much TV, you're going to hear lots of it. You're going to hear lots of it. And you had better be able to separate the wheat from the chaff. I know the only time I have to listen to it is on Sunday morning when my wife and I are getting ready for church. And often I'll say to her, honey, listen to what that person's saying. Listen to what he's saying. If he talked like that in business, they'd run him out of the place. And I wouldn't blame them. Because he's saying something that is so idiotic, so unscriptural, but he thinks he's being spiritual, but the people think the things of the Spirit won't stand up to the light of common sense. I don't know anything in the Bible that won't stand up to the light of common sense, but I know a lot of preaching that won't. When Paul said, many are saved by the foolishness of preaching, he didn't mean many are saved by foolish preaching. And dear friends, the way for you to get straightened out on your doctrine, your Christian doctrine, is to make very sure that you know this subject that we're talking about here. And very, very few people have ever made much of a subject study of this great subject we are talking about. Give you an example. Do you know you can be a seminary graduate today and only having had 9 hours of Bible in getting that seminary degree? 9 hours. Isn't that a lot? I led a man to Christ one time, had 9 years of higher Christian education after high school. After he got saved, he'd come back to see me, and he'd save up his questions. And he'd drive all the way from Wilmore, Kentucky, and you can guess what school is there, if you will. What seminary is there. All the way to Rockford, Illinois, where I live. He'd have a list of questions, all written out. He said, I would ask you the questions, and you'd tick the answers off like that. And he said, I'd go for home in about 2 hours, and I'd be mad halfway back to Lexington and Wilmore, Kentucky. The thing that made me mad, I said, oh God, here I have been 9 years getting higher Christian education, and this fellow eats me alive, and he answers my questions like that. So he began to take inventory of what he had been taught. This subject we're talking about tonight was almost non-existent to him. Plus, he'd only had 9 hours of Bible in that time. Well, I'm sure there's many men in this room could have done the same thing that I did with him. Now, We have never had so much religion. I didn't say so much Christianity. I said so much religions we've got in the United States right now, and so little godly living. Now, in engineering and research that I have worked in and worked on mechanisms, we usually judged it not by the way it looked, but by what it produced. If it didn't produce what we designed it to, we didn't stand there and holler at the machine or the mechanism. We went back to our calculations to see what was wrong in our calculations and in our planning of this mechanism. But I'm afraid that doesn't work, or it isn't applied like that in Christianity in our day. I wish it were. Now, we all admit there is a devil, a Satan. And up where I come from, they got quite a few Satan worshipers. You come up there, come up north, and you drive down these toll roads, and about every one of them you see a picture of a little girl, a little boy that disappeared. You know where most of those kids wind up? In devil worship ceremonies where they sacrifice those little kids alive. And they've been doing it over in England for over 30 years. I can name one of the biggest men from England you ever heard of. He was a real spiritualist. And that's what's been happening. Now, we've been producing those kinds of things. Now, we will all admit, I mean the Christian people, that the Muslims, the Mohammedans, have been deceived, right? We will admit the Hindus have been deceived. All you got to do is go over there and go in a Hindu temple in India, where I had my daughter and her mother over there several years ago. I think it was 1979, I think was that year. You go in a Hindu temple, you know what you'll see on the walls? All the sexual organs of a woman, all painted there. That's all they are. And then over here on this wall, they're all the sexual organs of the men. Now, in the Old Testament, you would have said they were disciples of Baal and Ashtaroth, the two goddesses of sex. And by the way, when God raised up Gideon to deliver Israel, it's quite amusing there. He comes to him through an angel, and he says, "Gideon, thou mighty man of valor." And I can see Gideon just turn around like this, say, "Who's he talking to?" "That is me." "Thou mighty man of valor, the Lord is with thee." Then he asked one of the three great classic questions in the Old Testament when he said, "Yes, if the Lord be with me, then where be all the miracles that our forefathers saw, such as getting across the Red Sea and so forth?" That was a very good question. Anyway, he agreed to obey God. And you know the first thing he did of importance? He went up on the top of these, what they call groves, and he tore down these idols to sex of Baal and Ashtaroth. And by the way, in Pittsburgh, we have in a museum an 8-foot statue of Ashtaroth, the female goddess of sex. I'll give you a description of her. A large woman, shapely woman, a naked woman, but with a snake wound around her right leg and the head going into her womb, signifying bestiality. And by the way, they've found also 3 other statues just like that. And that's what they were doing in Jericho when God says, "I don't want you to let any of them out of there alive." Because in Jericho, and by the way, it's been proved by the men that dig around that you and I admire, these fellows that can go dig in a certain place or the mountain and dig through all these various levels of civilization. We call them archaeologists. And they'll tell you 3 times a week in the city of Jericho, they sacrificed 3 live babies of less than a week in age, cremated them alive, and then took the ashes and put them into the foundations of the temple. Almost every person, without fail, in Jericho had a venereal disease of some kind or other. Can you begin to see why God, as the moral governor of the universe, wanted to have that stopped? And he said, I want you to wipe them off the face of the earth. And sometime, if you want me to explain to you the justice of that, I'll show you that is one of the greatest acts of love our great God in heaven ever did. Most of us do not know that justice is an attribute of love. Because tomorrow night, when we get into the next lesson, we get into the technical things here that we ought to. I'm going to show you that justice is an attribute of love, and I thank God for a mother that loved me, and so therefore she spanked me. You know why she spanked me? First, because I had it coming. Second, because she had a high regard for my brothers and sisters, for their well-being and their safety, and I wasn't paying much attention to their safety, so she was going to draw it to my attention. And she did it in a forceful way, and then she would explain it to me why. I want to tell you, I'm very grateful tonight for a mom and daddy that never read Dr. Spock. My dad never gave me a lesson with that nickel's worth of lumber that I didn't need, nor that I ever forgot. Now, this particular subject, it is, Satan has come as an angel of light. His main realm of endeavor is not in Hollywood, not in the taverns, not in debauchery, not in the nightclubs. Yes, he's there, but that's not his main place of endeavor. You know where it is? It's in theology. To get us to have wrong concepts about God, to throw up a theological fog between man and God that the God man sees or perceives, he wants nothing to do with. Now, my friends, if we ever dispel that fog, it's going to take well-educated, well-intentioned people that are willing to sit down and do some thinking night after night after night, because your very soul depends on this and those that are around you. And as I say, my friend Wesley Kurt and Gordon Olson would agree with me, this is the greatest subject that can ever grace the mind of man. Now, when I say the Muslims deceived, Hindus, the Buddhists, the Unitarians, Jehovah's Witnesses, and the Jesus-onlys, and you can go on and on and on. But it never dawns on us that we could be deceived. That we could be deceived. Now, I had lunch last week with a young preacher, very fine young man, about 35 years old, Bible school and seminary graduate. And I said to him, I said, here we will admit these people have been deceived, but not us. Now, I want to ask you a question. If you wanted to ruin the United States, would you start in the penitentiaries? Would you start in the penal farms? Would you start in the mental institutions? Or would you start at the Supreme Court level, where black doesn't mean black anymore and white doesn't mean white anymore? And they don't know the difference, that the Constitution was to be a freedom of religion, freedom of it, not freedom from it. And they twisted those things around. And some of those men that have been on the Supreme Court are the very men that are, now he's not there now, the one I'm referring to now, but he is the man that started teaching all this stuff to the unions. When you sit down at the bargaining table, they're not your friends, they're your enemies, and get everything out of them you could, just like if you'd captured another country. When really, many times that's your relative sitting across that bargaining table. And one of those is one of our best known Supreme Court justices, came directly from Harvard University, and he poisoned the minds of the trade unions when he should have been enlightening them about working, that if you work for a man, you have obligations to him and he have obligation to you. But justice is a thing in our day, my friends, it's just been turned around. So for us to think, we Bible believers, we've never been deceived on anything, that's a mountain of spiritual pride. As I said to this young man, now Jesus gave us 38 parables. And those parables are given to us to be paradigms through which we are to run things we've just read or that we believe about certain doctrines and certain things, and run our comprehension of them through that to see if we have the right interpretation. And I pointed out the first parable to him. I said, Jesus right here says, if you don't understand this one, you won't understand any of them. Besides, 30% of Jesus' teaching was in parables. But only Christians can understand parables. And it's very plain. He says it's not given to those that are without the household of faith to understand these things. Well, when are the people of the household of faith begun to do some serious study and be able to look at this great subject and the paradigms to warn our country? Because if we don't have revival, we don't have 10 years left in America. And this country has not had revival for at least four generations. We know so little about revival, we use evangelistic campaigns and revival interchangeably. They're as different as night and day, and that's like saying your heart and your blood are the same thing. Now I'll quote you the most pathetic verse Jesus ever quoted. I'll close. Children of this generation are wiser than the children of light, which means they'll study more on secular things than people of God will on the greatest thing that ever happened in this world.